It's so easy to pick up somebody else's offense, isn't it? But don't let bitterness take root in your life, because no good has ever come into our world through hatred and bitterness. So I want to start today. I want to talk about, the sermon title is The Power. This is part 1. In 2 weeks, when I do part 2, I'll have another aspect to this message called The Power. But I want to begin by reading this passage in Mark chapter 4, verses 35 to 39. And this is the story, of course, about the wind and the waves coming into the boat and the disciples fearing that they were going to lose their lives. And Jesus and the disciples had been ministering all day long. And Jesus, as God, was human. And how many realize as humans, you get tired after working all day long? I get tired. I do a half a day's work just getting out of bed in the mornings now. So I'm tired by noon. So, but Jesus and the disciples had been working, ministering, and it was evening, and we see this story unfold.
As the evening came, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let's cross to the other side of the lake." So they took Jesus in the boat and started out, leaving the crowds behind, although other boats followed. But soon a fierce storm came up. High waves were breaking into the boat, and it began to fill with water. Jesus was sleeping at the back of the boat with his head on a cushion. The disciples woke him, shouting, "Teacher, don't you care that we're going to drown?" When Jesus woke up, he rebuked the wind and said to the waves, "Silence, be still." Suddenly, the wind stopped, and there was a great calm.
So each part of the gospel story that Mark tells us, and I want to just reiterate, the book of Mark is actually, could be called the book of the Gospel of Peter, because Peter is virtually in all of the events of the book of Mark. And Peter is basically dictating to Mark what he should write. But Peter was not a well-educated man. He was a fisherman by trade. Not that if you're a fisherman, Robert, that you're not educated, obviously. Robert's a highly educated fisherman. But in the time of Christ, if you were a fisherman, you generally weren't highly educated. And so, but Mark was considerably educated, let me just put it that way. And he had a real gift for writing and being a scribe. And so Peter basically dictated to Mark the events of the book of Mark as a reminiscing, as a recalling. And then Mark would articulate them in a much more systematic way. And so as Mark begins to explain all these different parts of the book of Mark, what he does here is he reveals, as the book goes on, he reveals a little more and more and more of who Jesus is. He reveals who Jesus is regarding his power, his purpose, even his own self-understanding, who he became aware, in a sense, as he grew up, who he was, what his mission was, and so forth. And it is as though Mark is an expert storyteller. There's some people who just have a knack for telling stories, aren't there? There's some teachers that I studied under. Some were as dull as a drill bit drilling into concrete. And others were just so sharp, and they captivated your attention, and an hour would go by just like that. And Mark is one of these guys that's becoming a very, very gifted storyteller. And one of the marks of an eyewitness account is what people might call irrelevant detail. So if you witness a crime and the police are inquiring of you about what did you see, you might say, well, I saw this 57 Thunderbird drive by, and it has nothing to do with the crime, because you're recollecting all sorts of things that were happening at the moment of this incident. And they call that irrelevant detail. Now, fictional stories rarely contain irrelevant detail. When someone is telling a fictional story, everything is pointing to a specific ending or climax. Whereas an eyewitness will oftentimes have all sorts of irrelevant details in the narrative. But eyewitness accounts record many details simply because they remember them. It's not that the details have a significance to necessarily the outcome or what they're unnecessary to the story, shall we say. But they do have marks of what one would call genuine reminiscence. Genuine reminiscence. Think of the time when you were a child and you got that wonderful Christmas gift that you had anticipated. And remember back to that day, and you might think about the food that your mother was cooking, or what the Christmas tree looked like, or it was snowing that day, and none of that has anything to do with the gift that you got. And so this is basically called genuine reminiscence. So, for example, other boats were there. They took Jesus in a boat and started out, leaving the crowds behind, although other boats followed. What does that have to do with this story? Nothing. It has nothing to do with this story. It has nothing to do with the storm. It has nothing to do with the wind and the waves. But it's evidence of a genuine reminiscence. Jesus was asleep on a cushion. What does that have to do with the story? Nothing. It paints a picture of genuine reminiscence. And Mark is giving us Peter's firsthand reporting, which in the story that we just read, and I want to read it again with this, as we read this, just think of things. Well, what are things in this story that is being recorded that actually aren't really related to the real theme of the story? So let's read it one more time.
As evening came, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let's cross to the other side of the lake."
By the way, one of the reasons I think Jesus was frustrated with the disciples is Jesus said, "Let's go where?" Where? The other side of the lake. So they get in the boat. Do you think Jesus is going to let the boat sink if his goal is to get to the other side of the lake? See, we have to remember what Jesus tells us. It's important. And if Jesus says, let's go to the other side of the lake, you can bet your bottom dollar that you're going to make it to the other side of the lake. Because that's what Jesus said, right? Let's go on.
So they took Jesus in the boat and started out, leaving the crowds behind.
Which, by the way, has nothing to do with the story, right?
Leaving the crowds behind.
Leaving the crowds behind. Nothing to do with the story.
And other boats followed.
Nothing to do with the story.
But soon a fierce storm came up.
This has something to do with the story.
High waves were breaking into the boat, and soon it began to fill with water.
That has a lot to do with the story, doesn't it?
Jesus was sleeping at the back of the boat with his head on a cushion.
Has nothing to do with the story.
The disciples woke him up shouting, "Teacher, don't you care that we're going to drown?"
This is an aspect of the story.
When Jesus woke up, he rebuked the wind and said to the waves, "Silence, be still."
This is the story.
Suddenly, the wind stopped and there was a great calm.
Yes. So if you've not been to Israel, it's easy to read a lot of these stories and not really understand a lot about the topography of Israel. But the Sea of Galilee is actually 700 feet below sea level. Now, a lot of people don't realize that. And Mount Hermon, which is 30 miles to the north, rises to about 9,200 feet above sea level. So there's about a 10,000 foot difference between the top of Mount Hermon and the Sea of Galilee. And what do you think comes off the top of Mount Hermon? Cold air. What do you think comes from 700 feet below sea level? Warm air. And what happens when cold air and warm air meet each other? It's like the Hatfields and the McCoys. Okay? It's a clash. And the result of that is, by the way, Mount Hermon was where the Mount of Transfiguration took place, just as a point of reference for you as well. So cold air from the mountain clashes with this warm air from this 700 feet below sea level arid area coming up from the Sea of Galilee. And the result is an incredible storm. And these storms can come up very, very quickly. Now, a professional fisherman like Peter, James, and John, they were accustomed to rapid storms coming up. You might even call them, with all the hours that they spent on the Sea of Galilee, rather experienced sailors. They knew how to gauge the wind, they knew how to look at the skies, they knew how to do all of this stuff to stay safe. And this storm, however, had to have been an incredible one, because these experienced sailors / fishermen thought they were going to what?
Die.
They thought they were going to die. Say that in the mic.
Die.
Yes. And not die. Not die, but die.
Not die. They thought they were going to drown.
They thought they were going to drown. They did. And they did what we do when we feel we're being pinched between the rock and the hard place. They cried out to God, just like we do, just like Pastor Jeff was referring to today. He gets woke up at 4 in the morning. I'm always at 2:30. And one of the first thoughts that wants to come into my mind is saying to God, don't you care? Don't you care? Don't you care if we're going to drown? Because all of the evidence pointed to that. And the life that you and I are called to live is not a life of necessarily ignoring our circumstances. Because just because you ignore something doesn't make it go away, right? But not letting the circumstances dictate to us our perception and understanding if God does actually care about us. And so here's how Jesus responds to being woken up from a deep sleep. It says Jesus was sleeping at the back of the boat. This is verse 38. And they said, don't you care that we're going to drown? And verse 39 says, and when Jesus woke up, he rebuked the wind and said to the waves, silence, be still. And suddenly the wind stopped, and there was a great calm. Jesus woke up, and two amazing things, I think, happened here. The first was his words themselves. His words themselves. You notice he didn't brace himself. He didn't say to the disciples, step back, boys, I got this. He didn't roll up his sleeves. He didn't do any of that. He actually had no theatrics. He didn't take his tunic off and start waving it around. Right? He didn't raise a wand. Where's my spiritual prop? He actually didn't get on bended knee and start repeating some spiritual incantation. He simply said, silence, or be quiet, to the wind. And then he said another word, be still. to the waves. It doesn't say he yelled it at the top of his voice. When Jesus was on the cross and he cried out, that was with a loud voice. But the fact of the matter is, nature, which sometimes cannot be very friendly, heeds to the voice of the Lord. He simply said, "Silence, be still." And that was it. He said that to hurricane force winds. At least they probably appeared to be hurricane force winds to the disciples. I don't know about you, but I've been in like 80-mile-an-hour winds, and I couldn't tell you the difference between an 80-mile-an-hour wind and a 200-mile-an-hour wind, because I felt like I was going to be blown away with just the 80-mile-an-hour wind. And it's just as though Jesus was talking to an unruly child in some respects, with maybe one exception. This unruly nature yielded to the voice of Jesus. A lot of unruly children just don't yield to the voice of reason. That's why there's another method of giving them instruction. You know what I mean? The more astonishing thing, however, is that the storm really obeyed like a very compliant child. My grandson Cooper and we started watching the Andy Griffith Show a few years ago. And I think we've watched the whole series about 4 times now, all 9 seasons or whatever. And one of the things that always touches and warms my heart in the Andy Griffith episodes are the interaction between Opie and his dad, the sheriff. I wonder how many times Opie, throughout the 9 seasons or however many seasons there were of Andy Griffith, I wonder how many times he said, "Yes, Pa. Okay, Pa." And I envision this wind and waves basically saying, "Yes, Dad. Yes, Lord." Because that's what really happened. They said yes to the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And the wind died down and it was completely calm. And Mark is talking first about the wind when he says, be silent or be, and then when he then addresses the water when he says, be still. And completely calm can literally be translated dead calm. How many of you ever been by a lake and it's just dead calm? And you're standing on a dock and you look over, and what do you see? You can see a reflection of yourself because the waves aren't there. And this expression where it says, "and there was a great calm," this actually means a dead calm, where the winds had not only stopped, but the waves had stopped. Now, it's interesting to me that if you ever have been by a lake after a storm, the lake doesn't stop crashing waves on the shore immediately as soon as the wind stops. Sometimes it goes on for hours. And yet Jesus spoke 2 things. One, he stopped the wind, and the next, the Sea of Galilee was like a sea of glass. Completely calm. Even when the wind stops, the waves can keep pounding on the shore. Yet when Jesus said, "Be still," it stopped. The water became smooth as glass. And the thing that I keep asking God, and I pray to Jesus a lot, and I ask him, show me not just your face. I love to see the face of the Lord, but show me who you are. Show me who you are. And when I read this story, Jesus did not, shall we say, conjure up any power from a higher authority. When you and I pray, we need to tap into power from a higher authority. We don't have that power in us, in and of ourselves. But Jesus was or is that higher authority. He didn't pray to a higher authority, you know. You remember the movie Oh God with George Burns? I don't know if you can remember that. And God is testifying in court. And he said, do you swear to tell the whole truth, not but the truth, so help you God? And he said, I swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help me. Because he was God, right? And Jesus simply says, quiet to the storm and be calm to the waves, because he was the authority. I have transitioned over the course of my life in coming to know Jesus more, because I used to think Jesus is powerful. Sometimes we would say he's all-powerful. I don't say that anymore. I say it this way. Jesus is power. Jesus doesn't just have power. Generally speaking, people who have power can what? Lose it. It can be taken away from them. Satan has some power right now, but one day, what's going to happen to all that power? It's going to be taken away from them. But when you are power, what you are can't be taken away from you. I am Eddie Lother's son. That's my dad. And no matter what happens to me, that can't be taken away from me. If my dad would have been the King of England, I would have been the prince of the king. And I could be kidnapped, I could be killed, I could be taken away, put in a dungeon someplace, but I would still be the king's son, because it's who and what I am. And when Jesus spoke to the sea and the wind, he wasn't calling upon another power. He was the power. He was the power. And Jesus is demonstrating that he is not just someone who has power, but that he is power itself. So anyone in the universe who has any power has it on loan from Jesus. Anybody who has power in this whole universe or this earth has it on loan from Jesus. 1 John 4:4 says this, and we've quoted this many times in the course of our lives.
But you belong to God, my dear children. You have already won a victory over those people, because the Spirit who lives in you is greater than the spirit who lives in the world.
Right? So there's a spirit that lives in us. It's the Spirit of Christ. And the scriptures teach us that greater is he that lives in us than he that's in the world. That is supposed to be an encouragement to us. And as long as that Spirit lives within us, we have great power and authority, don't we? But let's never, ever, ever begin to deceive ourselves into thinking that we have that power because of all what we've done and all of our accomplishments and all that we believe. It's because he has gifted that to us. This is an incredible claim that all power comes from Jesus. That's an incredible claim. And if that's true, what does it mean for you and me? Because when we read the scriptures, we really do need to ask that question, don't we? What does this mean to me? What does this mean for me? What does this mean to me? How does this obligate me in my walk with God? And if this is true, that Jesus is all power, if Jesus is the Lord of the storm, then no matter what shape the world is in, no matter what shape your life might be in at the moment, what condition your life might be in the moment, you can know that Jesus provides all that you would ever need. Whatever healing you might need, whatever peace you might need in your circumstance, whatever power you might need, Jesus provides it all. But we can never, and I'll get into this more in my next message, but we can never ever come to the place where the object of our faith is all that we've done. Our object of our faith has always got to be Jesus. And I find myself, when I face adversity and difficulty and challenges and trouble, I find myself thinking, I need to have more faith. I need to rise to another level of faith. And yet Jesus said, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, which is, I understand it anyways, to be one of the smallest seeds of all, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you can actually say to this mountain, be thou removed. And of course, Jesus is speaking metaphorically there, but we have mountains in our lives, don't we? And if you have the faith the size of a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, be thou removed, and it can be cast into the sea. So the question I have for you today is, how important is it that you have mega faith? It's not important. What's important is the object of your faith. Who is your faith in? And I keep saying to myself, don't put your trust in yourself, Brian. Put your trust in Jesus. Put your trust in the Lord. Put your trust in that person who gave his life for you. And God puts me in one sticky wicket after another. I don't even know what a sticky wicket is, but it's not good. And all I can say is, Jesus, I give everyone and everything to you. And I trust in you. I pray for wisdom. My first prayer is, Lord, keep me from myself. Help me not trust in myself. May I trust in you. May you lead me. May you guide me. And I can find that the same wind and waves that caused the disciples to fear that they were going to die can come into all of our lives. And the same God, whose name is Jesus, who said, peace and be still. That's all he said, peace, be still. The same God who said that in a boat that was about to capsize can say it for you and say it for me. Peace, be still. Peace, be still. So we find ourselves as a nation, and I gave a little bit of an encouragement to our staff this past week. Most of you are aware of the fact that Charlie Kirk's memorial was last Sunday. And I don't talk a lot about world and national events. Some people criticize me for that. I'd rather have my focus be on, obviously, teaching all I can on helping you walk closer to Jesus. But I do think that there is certainly a place. We as the church need to be a mouthpiece for the truth. And I was thinking about his martyr. He was assassinated for what he believed and the words he spoke, not for something he did. He didn't hurt anybody. He didn't steal from anybody, didn't harm anybody. And my mind drifted back to what we would call the first martyr in the New Testament church. And we know that to be the story of Stephen. And just to set the table a little bit, obviously the day of Pentecost had happened. 3,000 people came into the kingdom with Peter's message that day. The church was beginning to, shall we say, explode. The followers of Jesus began to really make an impact. And there was a man who was quite articulate in serving the early church, and his name was Stephen. And if you read in the book of Acts, you know that he was stoned and killed for his faith. And he was, in a lot of ways, like Charlie Kirk, he was very articulate. He was a spokesperson. And the scheme of the enemy was, if we can take this spokesperson's life, then we can stop this dangerous message from getting out. And so they killed him. They killed Stephen. Now, I imagine that there were family and close friends that knew Stephen that had if either witnessed it or found out about it that were brokenhearted. There were probably others who were part of that 3,000 that maybe never met Stephen, but they knew of him. And the impact on all of these new followers of Jesus was at a crossroads for these people. And that crossroads was this. Because I can't imagine anybody who saw the stoning of Stephen or those who cared about him, I can't imagine them not being angry about what had happened. And the scriptures tell us to be angry and sin not. And so the admonition I had for our staff this past week was for all of us to turn our anger into action and not let that anger become bitterness. But that we had to do more as Christians than just speak. We had to, as James says, faith without works is dead. And so I encouraged our staff this past week to resolve to walk, number one, in a greater place of obedience in our own lives. Don't let bitterness take root in your life because of these things. It's so easy to pick up somebody else's offense, isn't it? But don't let bitterness take root in your life, because no good has ever come into our world through hatred and bitterness. It kills. So let's resolve to walk in a greater place of obedience in our lives. And let us give our lives every day as an offering to the Lord. And an offering that was given, if you think metaphorically or even literally, on an altar, that sacrifice died. And that's why Paul says to us, for us to die daily. Let us die daily to the passions of the flesh and the temptations to strike back and to be revengeful.
So keep giving it. Just keep giving it to God.
Yes.
When the emotion arises, just keep giving it to God.
Lay it down. Yes. And so I asked the Lord, how can I be more obedient to you, Lord, show me how I can be more obedient. Because even Isaiah, who was a great prophet, was pronouncing woes upon the land. And then God took a coal off the altar of God where the purity is pure and touched him with that coal. And what was his response?
Woe is me.
Woe is me. See, it's so easy to pronounce woes on our land, woes on this politician, woes on that side of the aisle, woes on this, what have you. But judgment begins in the house of the Lord. And let's look at our hearts first. Let us not become bitter. Let's look at our hearts first. Let God humble us in a way that will honor him, and let's walk in humility. And then the last thing I would encourage all of us to do, because I felt like I've been around a few people in the course of my life that just, I would say to myself, man, I wish I could talk like that, you know? They were so gifted in how to articulate so many truths of the scriptures and the gospel and just life. And a great voice was taken from us. But instead of sitting back and saying, woe is us, what I would encourage all of us to do is to become more articulate, more gifted in how we share the good news of the gospel. And one of the ways to do that is you actually have to rub shoulders with people who aren't like you. If the only people you talk to speak your same language, right? In our language, I call it Christianese, right? Right? We speak Christianese to each other, but we go to someplace else where people have never been to church, don't know anything about the scriptures. God is, who knows what it means to them when you say the word God. And you sit down and you start to talk to them, you know what? You can't speak Christianese to them. You can't. Not if they're going to hear and believe the message. So we have to learn how to speak in a way and articulate this message in a way that goes beyond the way we learned to do it when we were 5 years old 70 years ago. Well, I'm not quite that old. Close. So all I'm saying is that let's become more articulate in sharing the gospel. And in doing so, we just might end up with a bunch of Republicans and sinners coming to the Lord. I'm sorry. You Republicans were offended by that. Publicans and sinners.
That's
okay.
Christianese. You're speaking Christianese.
I'm Christianese now.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you know what? Another thing that's really important, and when we went through that one course from, you remember that course?
That Gary
talked
loved.
about
Gary
practicing, really sharing very quickly our own personal testimony.
Your story.
What God has done for us and what it means to us to love Jesus. And when you think about it, really honing it down and really knowing it.
Yes.
Yeah.
I want to finish by telling a quick story. So there were a lot of evangelism methods coming to the forefront when we first started in the ministry. And I had a young guy that I was mentoring, and he had learned this method of sharing the gospel. And I said, I'm not sure that I agree with what you're trying to do. And he said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, just pretend I'm a guy that you just met, and you're trying to present the gospel to me. So he said, okay. He said, hi, my name is Adrian. That's what his name was. Hope you're not watching this, Adrian. He lives in a different state now, by the way.
I'm sure he's grown.
Yes, he has. And he said, I'd like to ask you a question. I said, sure, go ahead. What's your question? He said, if you were to die tonight, would you go to heaven? And I said to him, I don't believe in heaven. And he just looked very strange at me and he said, gee, they didn't tell me what to say if someone said that. So then I said, you see, Adrian, has Jesus saved you? Yes. Do you have a relationship with Jesus? Yes, I do. What has he done for you? Tell me some of the good things he's done for you. And he rattled off a few things. I said, just tell people that. That's the story of the gospel in your life. You don't need to go through 4 spiritual laws or this or that and make sure someone repeats a prayer after you. Just tell people your story about what Jesus has done for you. And as they do that, learn how to articulate it better. I think I speak better today than I did in my very first sermon. I think I do. But in the end, it's not you giving an intellectual, theological journey for someone to somehow come to know God. Just tell them your story. Tell them what Jesus has done for you. And you know what? Nobody can argue with that. Nobody can argue with me on nobody can say to me, well, Jesus didn't do that for you. What? You were with me? You didn't know who I am, what I was like, what God did in my heart. And so as we move forward now in America and the world, let's not allow bitterness to take root in our hearts. Let's learn to articulate this wonderful message of Jesus' love for us. And let's give ourselves wholeheartedly every day. May we lay down our lives. May we sacrifice ourselves for Jesus and his kingdom. Let's pray.
Let's keep praying for what God is doing. There's something big happening in our country. There's people coming to Jesus.
There are kids going off to college that are packing their Bibles, a Bible rather. They've never read it, but they felt drawn since this terrible tragedy. And they're going off to college with the Word of God saying, I want to find out what's in here. And God is doing something great.